Great. Well, thank you for joining us. Thanks for attending this session on keeping your home and garden safe from fire. We're very happy to have several speakers, actually including myself, to talk about defensible space and how to develop a beautiful garden, keeping track of defensible space. This is a collaboration between the University of California Cooperative Extension and our Master Gardener program. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that is later on in this webinar. But we've had a great collaboration and developed some materials together to help landowners in the Tahoe Basin develop beautiful gardens that are also defensible and fire resistant. So during this webinar, we're going to start with descriptions and talk on defensible space in the Tahoe Basin. And we're lucky to have Michael Haran here, who will give us information on how to do that. And then afterwards, I'm going to speak for the Master Gardeners on how to develop a beautiful garden. So first, what not to do, and second, what to do and what to plant. So that's kind of the overview of the webinar. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Michael. And Michael, hopefully you can also introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Michael Haran. I am the community specialist with North Tahoe Fire. I started with North Tahoe Fire last year as a seasonal defensible space inspector, and then this year came on full-time as the community specialist. So bulk of my job is working with our fire-adapted communities and home hardening uh, risk assessments and whatnot. I also help lead the charge with our Firewise program and orchestrate a lot of our grant funding with green waste dumpsters and just the multitude that can come along with defensible space. So without further ado, I will share my screen and hop on in here. Are y'all still able to see that presentation?
It looks great.
Yes. Perfect, thank you. So yeah, I'll be leading the introduction on defensible space. We're talking about two things that determine whether a home survives a wildfire, which is going to be defensible space as well as home hardening. One obviously is going to be the defensible space that's outside in the yard. The other is going to be the building itself. When both are done together, they make a huge difference. We're going to look at how homes actually will burn in the event of a wildfire, what you can do in each defensible space zone, and then also gives just some super simple practical tips to help start implementing home hardening. So firstly off, there are three main ways homes catch fire. First, in this top left corner is going to be radiant heat, a dead tree, dead debris, uh, uh, structure that's burning nearby, anything adjacent to a home that is on fire can put off enough heat to ignite the structure even without flames touching it. The second is the direct flame contact down here in the bottom left. It's pretty straightforward. Sounds exactly like it sounds. Anything that's on fire that the flame has enough space to actually make that direct contact, that's going to be actual flame ignition. And then the most common way is actually going to be windblown embers. Embers can travel up to a mile from the original start. They'll land in dry material, get into your eaves, vents, start small fires, and that just leads to a very quick combustion of your home itself. Most homes are lost from embers, not from a big wall of flame. So we definitely want to make sure that we've got our home hardened as much as possible from these embers, just to give ourselves the greatest chance of survival. And then defensible space. Defensible space is all about the area around the home. We reduce fuels if we reduce fuels as a fire gets close, it's less intense. The firefighters can safely defend the home. Its fire isn't going to spread as quickly to the structure. And I want to make an emphasis here. We're not clear cutting the forest or turning everything into gravel. We still want a healthy, attractive landscape. We just don't want it to act like a fuse when those embers land. Exactly like those old cartoons where the fuse line right to the TNT, vegetation can act that exact same way with a fire spreading right up to your structure. And that's definitely something we're trying to mitigate with defensible space. The closer something is to the house, the more important it is. And that's why we've divided defensible space up into three different zones. And it is a little convoluted. We go through zone 0, zone 1, and zone 2, not zone 1, 2, and 3. Although there are those three zones. But the first zone is going to be your most important zone. This is the ember resistant zone, or zone 0, and it's the first 5 feet around the structure. Moving on to zone 1, the lean, clean, and green zone. This is 30 to 100 feet around your structure. And then zone 2, your reduced fuel zone, is 30 to 100 feet around your structure, or 30 feet to your property line, whichever comes first. In the Tahoe Basin, you're very fortunate if you have 100 feet around your structure all on your property. So if you don't have that, just go up right up to that property line, and then start working with your neighbors to help create that 30 to 100-foot zoning completion. Um, each zone has a different goal. Zone 0 is all about stopping those embers, especially in wind-driven embers. Um, Zone 1 is about keeping the flames away from walls and windows. That's going to be a lot more of that radiant heat or direct flame contact. We want to have stuff ample enough space away from the structure to where that's not a possibility. And then zone 2 will slow the fire's movement through vegetation, which will help provide an easier fight for first responders and firefighters to get that fire out before it gets too close to your structure. So diving into each individual zone, zone 0, as I mentioned, is the first 0 to 5 feet around the home. Um, this does include under decks. If you wanted to be super proactive, you can also include fences and provide that first 5 feet of an ember resistant zone. Um, in this zone, we don't want to see items like wood piles, bark mulch right up against the house. Ideally, we have absolutely nothing in this zone. Think of gravel, pavers, rock, concrete, all great choices that help in the maintenance of this zone. Having a lot of those BMP practices in place will help reduce any sort of growth in the future as well. Ultimately, this tiny little strip, the first 5 feet around the structure, is going to be your biggest defense in ember ignition, against ember ignition. Um, One statistic I always like to throw out when talking about this zone, having this ember resistant zone clean and maintained will actually double your structure's chances of surviving a wildfire. So there's very provable statistics behind defensible space, and it is hugely important. Um, Further, there are no fireproof plants. Some choices are better than others, but if you want plants in that zone 0, keep them low, irrigated, and spaced apart. For vegetation in this zone, avoid shrubs underneath windows, vents, or roof edges, especially underneath decks. I see that as a common area during defensible space inspections. They have a bunch of dead debris and growth happening. That's a ripe area for fire to start and spread quickly to your structure. If you do have firewood in this spot, try not to store it, especially in the summer months. Keep it at least 30 feet of the way if possible. If for whatever reason that isn't possible, during the summer months, all we look for is a completely enclosed firewood pile with an ember resistant tarp. They're hugely important. They'll stop any sort of embers melting through those cheap plastic little tarps, and really help protect that home, especially if that firewood is in this crucial area. And then moving on to zone 1, this is the lean, clean, and green zone. So that's 5 to 30 feet away from the structure. We want this area to be clean and tidy. Definitely not clear cut, as I mentioned, but just clean and tidy. Think the lean, clean, and green. I'm going to make an emphasis on that. Um, that means lean is a small amount of vegetation with all ample space in between. We really want to see those, again, those fuse lines. We want to see everything spaced out so there isn't that solid line right up to the structure. Clean, very straightforward, keeping all dead leaves, needles, cones, stuff along those lines completely out. There's really no need for that kind of vegetation on the landscape around your structure. And then the green, also very straightforward, means living plants are watered when possible, especially if the plant is a water-loving plant. We want to make sure that it stays moist. That'll help with a slower combustion time for those plants. You absolutely can and should have vegetation in this zone. It just shouldn't be thick or overgrown. And then this is an example of Zone 1. These are actual homes within North Tahoe Fire's Protection District. Um, think of plants as islands. Each one should be standing on its own. You don't want to let shrubs grow up under trees. That creates what we call a ladder fuel, which is a perfect way for fire to move from the ground up into the larger tree canopy. A running crown fire is very difficult to fight. And so we definitely want to try and keep, when possible, fire on the ground and not up in these tree canopies. Um, if you look across zone one, you can see places where fire could run from one plant to another. It's time to start thinking about creating some space in that area. And again, I want to make an emphasis because I've seen it happen a lot. This is not about removing everything. We don't want to see this area get clear cut. It's just about breaking up fuel pathways. And then propane tanks. These are still very common up here in the Tahoe Basin. They're getting increasingly less common, but I wanted to make a big emphasis that if you have propane tanks, they need to have a 10-foot bubble around them from anything combustible, including weeds, flammable plants, firewood. I've seen firewood piles stacked right up against their propane tanks. That's just obviously a no-brainer and definitely don't want to do that. A lot of modern propane tanks, they will vent when they have that heat temperature difference. But if the temperatures are hot enough, it can lead to a catastrophic event. And it's just something we don't want to have our firefighters working around these propane tanks in extreme temperatures. So always make sure that you have at least that 10-foot bubble. If you want to go above and beyond and create a larger bubble, that would be great. And then obviously we're living in pine country. Pine needles, cones, resinous trees, they burn hot. Spacing is key when it comes to the pine dominated ecosystem. Try to separate individual trees or clumps by 10 feet from branch tip to branch tip when possible. This is especially something to think about when planting new trees on your property. With already established trees in the Tahoe ecosystem, not having that 10 feet isn't a crucial step to be missing. Branch tips, we have shared canopy spacing. Shared canopy spacing can actually be hugely beneficial to fire. It keeps shade on the landscape, moisture content down. It makes it just that much harder for plants to catch on fire on the ground. Um, Shrubs should be ideally low and out of a tree's drip line. That's our ladder fuel situation. I remove them completely if possible. Should you have any sort of shrubs underneath trees, make sure there's ample space above it to help eliminate that ladder fuel risk. Again, we want to keep fire on the ground, not up into the tree canopy. We're trying to keep it on the ground always. Um, then this is pretty straightforward process, but for the pine dominated ecosystem, we routinely want to remove pine needles. The recommendation is once every spring. I typically say let's try and get 2 thorough cleanings in there, once at the beginning of spring and one about in the middle of the summer. I hugely believe in the middle of the summer cleaning, as that's when moisture content is getting the lowest, temperatures are getting the hottest. We want to try and remove anything dead in this zone. So if you have the ability, let's get 2 thorough cleanings within this zone one. And we'll be in great shape in terms of defensible space and all of that dead debris. Moving on to zone two, this is that 30 to 100 feet. The goal here is to slow fire as it moves through vegetation. That can mean thinning trees, spacing vegetation, removing dead material. This area often blends into the natural forest and sometimes involves working with neighbors or land agencies to help create that defensible space in shared areas. As I mentioned, you're fortunate if you've got that 100 feet around your structure in the Tahoe Basin. We really want to make an emphasis that when you don't have that, start working with your neighbors, join in the shared goal of defensible space, and really try and get this zone tidied up. This is an example of zone two, 30 to 100 feet away from the structure. We want to, again, remove all dried vegetation, i.e. dead shrubs, fallen branches, dried grasses, weeds. If we're living in that forest ecosystem, don't allow to have that pine needle depth to exceed 3 inches. Once it starts getting that thick, that's a perfect bed for embers to land. All of that dead fuel will ignite very quickly, and then spread the fire to that other vegetation like manzanita and white thorn. Um, So we wanted to create that separation. Dense shrubs and trees increase wildfire hazard. It's a no-brainer. More fuel equals hotter fire, harder to put out. Instead, make that separation between shrubs or small clumps. This includes pinyon and juniper, and try and increase the space between lower, less dominant Jeffrey pine and white fir. White fir loves to grow up underneath the in the tree drip line of our pines. They like that shade. They like grown in that pine needle duft. Let's try and take those down. Those are perfect ladder fuels. They hold on to all of that dead debris, keep free up resources for those more mature trees on the ecosystem, and then just really, again, dial in that neighbor coordination and making this zone as clean as possible. So then that also gets into how far do we really need to extend? I've said 100 feet, but that also largely depends on your property. If you're on a slope that extends downhill, you're sitting at the top of a hill, fire runs up hill fast. You're going to want to increase that spacing. So please do reference this guide. It shows that 20% to 20 to 40%. As we start getting into that 40% grade, we're going to want to see increased space. That means farther distance in between your shrubs, farther distance in between the trees, less ladder fuels overall. Again, I'm making an emphasis on this. It's all about separation and breaking up continual fuels. Separation is definitely the key when it comes to defensible space. So just getting into a couple of our numbers. For example, the typical tree shrub height is about 2 feet, and then there should be about 4 feet of separation for that height. So think 2 times the height. 2 foot high shrub, 4 feet of clearance on all sides. You definitely don't want to see this kind of shrubbery getting close together. Once it's all paired together, that's that continual fuel line that we're trying to get rid of. Prune trees up to the minimum of code is 6 feet. We highly recommend if you can go up to 10 feet, hugely important, but I want to make an emphasis as well. That's only for trees that can support 6 feet or 10 feet. Smaller trees, pretty much anything under that 18-foot high, you don't want to take past that 6 feet. Stop at that 1/3. You can leave the tree susceptible to disease and infestation, which means a die off, more dead fuels, obviously hotter fire, just more fuels to burn. And then removing ladder fuels. Dead vegetation is what burns the hottest and the fastest. Manzanita loves to hold on to that dead vegetation. So think of it as fires moving along the ground, hits all that dead vegetation, climbs right up into that hot, oily manzanita plant, and then can climb right up into the tree canopy. This is a huge emphasis. We don't want to have those running fires. So really try and remove any sort of vegetation from a tree's drip line. If you do have plants underneath the tree's drip line, we want 3 times that plant's height clear above it. So 2 foot high shrub, you want 6 feet of clearance before that first tree branch. Again, we're just really trying to slow the spread of fire, allow enough time for first responders to get there and put that fire out before it reaches your structure. And then, yeah, this is that tree maintenance. How should you deal with your trees? Obviously, remove weak, dead, or dying trees. North Tahoe Fire does, and the rest of the fire districts do provide defensible space inspections, where oftentimes we can evaluate the health of trees for you. And I believe the master gardeners can help you out with that as well if you think your tree is infested with some sort of disease, whether it's insect or mistletoe, something along those lines. Again, trim those tree branches up. Don't remove over 1/3 of a tree's branches. As a general rule of thumb, never remove more than 1/3, and then remove all shrubs and trees underneath the drip line. I also want to make an emphasis when you are limbing trees, try and leave a 1 to 2 inch stub. If you cut it flush with the bark, or the trunk of the tree, you're going to leave that tree susceptible to disease and infestation. And that's just obviously a no-brainer. We don't want to see that happen. We're not looking for any more tree to die off in the Tahoe Basin. We have had a substantial amount. And then again, remove all dead vegetation with this zone. Weeds, dead and dying shrubs, for just down the foothills, any sort of cheatgrass or weeds. Dead branches, needles, and leaves, all of that should be just completely off the ecosystem, especially around your structure. When we start getting away from that 100 feet and you're in that wildland area, it is great to have all of that stuff decomposing, returning back into the soil. But around your structure, it's just frankly not going to decompose quick enough to be a benefit. So let's really try and get that stuff out of there. Um, and defensible space, it's ongoing. It's never over. It's never a one and done thing. Needles drop all year round, plants grow, weather dries things out. So make it routine. Quick cleanups throughout the entire year are easier than tackling everything at once. Think of it as just a yard maintenance with purpose. Other than, looking good, it does look good, but it also will greatly help in protecting your property. Um, and then briefly touching on home hardening, I do want to reference this diagram. It is your vents, roofs, eaves, attached fence, all of this. The green, hugely kind of a lower risk. The red is going to be that hugely important thing to try and address. Um, Even with beautiful defensible space, embers can still land on the structure. They look for openings, cracks, dry leaves and gutters, wood on decks, firewood piles right by your front door, or fences touching the house. Home hardening means reducing opportunities for that ignition, so eliminating a lot of those factors. Think sealing gaps, installing ember-resistant vents, cleaning your gutters regularly, replacing highly combustible features when you can, like attached fence. That doesn't mean removing your whole fence. We just look for that first 5 feet attached to the structure to become non-combustible. That helps eliminate that fuse line right up to your structure. And it's a great thing to implement. And in all honesty, adds a little bit of spice to those boring old wood fences. So it's something great to try and start thinking about. And home hardening can get very expensive, and it definitely does not need to happen all at once. Make a list, rank by time and cost. Start with the easiest. I've had homeowners that go in and implement vent screening. They just go and get 1/8 inch or 16th inch mesh screening from, any sort of local hardware store, install it on their vent openings, and they've severely reduced the risk to their property with that one action alone. And the little DIY project is always fun. Um, and so I would love to chat more about home hardening, but I do want to save time for everybody else. So if there are any questions, please do feel free to reach out to me. Um, I did not leave my email on this, but it will be in the bio of this video, and as well as in the chat. It's going to be Haran@ntfire.net. So thank you again very much for your time.
All right. So my name is Susie Kocher. I'm a forester for the University of California Cooperative Extension in the Central Sierra. I work primarily with private forest landowners to help them understand how to better manage their forests. And I really appreciated a lot of Michael's content on how to take care of your trees as you're doing your defensible space and everything that he talked about. It's very important to reduce our fire risk. The previous presentation focused a lot on managing the landscape for defensible space. And then what I'm going to do is talk about how to also make that beautiful through plant choices. So I'm going to start off by saying that Tahoe is a difficult place to garden. Anyone who's lived here a while will attest to that. There are a lot of reasons for that. Our climate at high elevation makes growing plants difficult. We have very poor soils. Our forested condition means there's a lot of trees to work around, and there are a lot of native pests that can challenge your garden. Learning to deal with these is a journey, and it is very possible. And after overcoming some of these, you can have a beautiful garden that's also fire safe. I'm going to go through each one of these and just give you a little bit of background on them. So I already said that we have a high elevation climate, and it is very cold in the winter, unlike most of California. We get frosts in the summer, we have cold nights, we have a huge variation between the temperature during the day and at night, even in the summer. So dealing with that takes some ingenuity, and it takes making good plant choices that can survive our climate. So there are several ways to rank the type of plants and what they're adapted to. This first one on the left is the Sunset Magazine Plant Hardiness Map, and you'll see here we are up here. It's a very large scale from 1 to 20, I believe, and we are at 2 in the coldest region here. 2B for the most part, and 1A in some parts of Nevada. If you look over here on the right, there's another system used by the rest of the country, the U.S. Department of Agriculture Plant Hardiness Zone, and it has rankings as well. And we are 6 or 7, depending on where you are around the Tahoe Basin. So these numbers are important to know because when you go to a nursery to buy plants for your landscape, that information is typically on the plant label. And making sure you're buying something that can handle the cold winters if it's a perennial is important. We also have annuals that always die in the winter, so that it's less important for that. We have a short growing season, typically 90 days, June 15th to September 15th. Although, that's if you're lucky. One year we had a frost August 1st that killed all my tender plants. So, yeah, adjusting your expectations and realizing you're not going to be able to grow things here that you could grow in other parts of California is an important first start for being a successful Tahoe gardener. And so overcoming the climate, choosing the plants carefully, as I described, is important. Identifying the plants that you want and looking at their hardiness. And then protecting your tender plants from the cold by positioning. I often see people who have it on the lee of the house, possibly. South facing would be a warmer area. You might have microclimates on your site. So these are things to keep in mind. But then, there are other methods also to try and keep the cold out. So here's an example of a greenhouse that's ready to assemble that you can buy, which obviously is somewhat costly, but it can definitely extend your season. Here's the one I have in my backyard. It's a leftover frame from a portable garage that I've had for 20 years that I buy greenhouse plastic for. And with some kind of season extender, you can really get a little bit more time to grow your plants. This one's also in my backyard. This is a cold frame. You can see there's a raised bed with a way to close the window at night and keep out the nighttime cold. So I have found that I can get an additional month on each end of that short growing season to be able to grow plants that require more time. So that's one way to overcome climate challenges. Poor soils are another condition of the Tahoe Basin. Mostly they're sandy and coarse. This is also me in my backyard. Here is us digging up to put hardware cloth on the bottom of all of our beds and sifting out all the rocks. So we have a lot of rocks, and then on top of that, we have more rocks. So dealing with this kind of soil is a challenge. It's usually nutrient poor, especially nitrogen, often is acidic and can become compacted. And you'll see that a lot in people's front yards where people have been parking for years, just basically a hard pan. So soils are a challenge. There are some ways to overcoming that. Amending the soil is very important if you want to have a successful garden. That both improves water retention through the organic matter that bonds and is in the soil bed. It makes it more aerated and it adds nitrogen for fertility. Any kind of organic matter or fertilizer is going to help. Another way to deal with poor soil is choosing native plants that already are well adapted to the landscape and soils we have here. Raised beds where you can add purchased potting soil is another strategy, or leaning into the sparse look. So here we are. Here's a picture of raised beds. You can amend the soil in one particular location. That's my vegetable garden there again. And you can then, really concentrate where you're putting your nitrogen and trying to grow plants. Or leaning into the sparse look. There you go. It's not a very fertile soil, so you have widely spaced plants and not a lot of them. That's both good for defensible space, as you heard, and also requires less inputs. Although, if you do not amend your soil, you will be watering because our soils are incredibly well drained. We'll all be watering, but the more amendment you do, the less issue that is. And I just want to point out also, this is a big pile of manure. That is a helpful amendment for any kind of gardening. Okay, how does this house look to you? This is a forested condition, which can be an issue. It clearly doesn't pass the defensible space tests. There is an inherent risk from pines in our neighborhoods because of the pine litter, which really loves to burn. There's also just encroachment by trees. Trees are growing and taking over the landscape, or we're very dense and not managed over time. Then there's a lot of shade and competition for growing space. I also want to point out this wood shake roof, which is a perfect combination of wildfire risk right here in one home. So removing some trees. It can be difficult for some homeowners to do that. I often find people who maybe don't want to remove this little tree, they think it's the baby tree they have to save for the future. But you heard a great example and direction from Michael about how to limb up these trees, rake, and if it were me, I'd take quite a few of these out just to give space around the house and to meet your defensible space requirements. Pests. Okay, we've got them. Rodents especially. So here's a ground squirrels, here's a vole or a meadow mouse, and here's our pocket gopher. Oh my gosh. Yeah, this is what you find throughout many lawns in the Tahoe Basin. And I wish I had an actual solution for this. I just have strategies. So traps, unfortunately, gophers can only really be caught by kill traps under the ground, and it takes some strategy to be able to do that. There are repellents and there are barriers as well. So here's hardware cloth. I availed myself of this year, put it underneath every one of my raised beds to keep out the rodents. Here's someone who really wanted to keep anybody from coming in from the top too. So barriers can be quite effective, but they are, infrastructure that would have to be installed and planned for while you're developing a garden. Okay, so here I am with a diagram from the wildfire home retrofit kit put out by the Tahoe Living with Fire of the University of Nevada Cooperative Extension. And here are the zones that we are concerned about. So here is our zone 0, our 0 to 5. Here's our zone 1, 5 to 30 feet. And here's our zone 3, which is 30 to 100 feet. So this is a schematic of how to think about these zones. So zone 0 within 5 feet of the structure, there you are. In Tahoe, we have a lot of gravel from best management practices for water infiltration. So many homes have these automatically. This 5 feet of zone 0 should include everywhere connected to your house, including your deck and around your fence. So here is the fence with the non-combustible 5 feet away from the home. And in this ideal situation, there are no plants and no mulch. And we recommend instead using hardscaping, which would include things like gravel, as I was describing before, concrete, brick, and rock. So many of us learned the concept of foundation planting. Here you go. This is a whole series of ornamental junipers right up next to this apartment building in Gardnerville, which burned in 2016. And this was actually someone in an upper bedroom smoking a cigarette that threw the cigarette out the window, which immediately ignited this ornamental juniper and caused a lot of financial and human damage. And so, this concept of putting a whole bunch of plants right up next to your house to cover your foundation, I think was imported here from other parts of the country where it rains more and this might not be as much of an issue. But it really is a terrible idea in most of the West and in the Tahoe Basin. So instead of putting a whole bunch of shrubs under your window, as you may see elsewhere, separating vegetation from the house in that first 5 feet is incredibly important. And so here is the a little sidewalk along. We do have a shrub under here, but overall, the vegetation has been separated from the house. Here's another example, gravel with a stone walkway that looks attractive. In Tahoe, we also have a lot of erosion control measures. So this is all rock riprap that's been put to maintain soil on the site and also serves, as an amazing defensible space tool. And there are really a lot of varieties of hard surfaces. I think you could think, if you hadn't seen a lot of interesting ways this had been done, that it would all be quite boring. This is part of a column with the house. Here's the walkway. Here's some colored different rocks. And really, we have a lot of different rock products that can be purchased with different colors, different shapes. And there can be quite a bit of variety put into the landscape, even without plants. Here's a backup if you have to have plants. There they are in a pot, and they can be moved away. This is pea gravel here. So this is clearly imported also. They've chosen a specific color to go. Okay, so that was zone 0, your non-combustible zone. For plants, we're really going to talk about zone 1, which is your lean, clean, and green zone from 5 to 30 feet. Here it is in this diagram. And just to repeat a little bit, the purpose of zone 1 is to minimize the chance for fire to climb into the crown of trees. It's important to remove your dead vegetation, maintain the spacing between shrubs and trees, remove ladder fuels, and use mulch appropriately, not everywhere. And then I guess I would just add, it's also a great place to plant a beautiful garden. So gardens can come in many designs and they can have many themes or emphases. You can emphasize whatever you're interested in. So these are some fairly common gardens that we see around the Tahoe Basin. Here is a pollinator garden. We have hollyhocks and sunflowers, and the bees are loving it. Wildflower gardens, other types of domesticated flowers, veggies, berries. These are all great themes that you could have in a garden design. And I really should have added there just an attractive landscape with lawn and combinations as well. Here's a beautiful wildfire garden. This is herbaceous, low growing, and not near the house, and it's quite lovely. Here are some of the components of a garden that I'm going to go through and show you. It's important to think about your design while you're planning your garden. We will talk about which plants to plant, but really how you arrange them, where you put them, these are the most important for defensible space issues, as well as what plants to plant. So we're going to look at low density, mosaics, paths, planting islands, fire breaks, borders, and water features. So some of the pictures I showed you just recently there had a lot of dense plants. There are a lot of attractive ways to do low density plantings with interspersed rocks that we see around town, often done by professional landscapers that really look terrific. Here's another low density planting you could near somebody's yard. As you can see, actually, there's the garbage cans, there's the house, but there's certainly not plants everywhere. There's little rock features and there's individual plants around the house. Here's kind of a mosaic. Here's the native trees that were here. You can see they planted a lawn. They have some, hopefully mostly deciduous shrubs. If we're concerned about this from a defensible space perspective, the recommendation was that it should be 10 times the height of the shrub before you get to the canopy. And in this case, this is the case. We do have a somewhat flammable manzanita bush. There is just one of them there, and the house is over here. So this is thimbleberry, deciduous, and low growing. So you have kind of a mosaic, and we do see a lot of that around the Tahoe Basin. Here's a planting island as described earlier. You can't necessarily see it very well, but this is a gravel path. It doesn't connect to the house, and there's an island with flowers, mostly herbaceous material. I don't see any shrubs in there, and also ground covers. So I think this would rank fairly highly on a defensible space scale, a rank. And then fire breaks. So I should have mentioned most of these photos are from our Master Gardener Landscape Tour this summer in 2025 in July. We hosted community members to look at beautiful and fire-safe homes around South Lake Tahoe. And so here's some of the master gardeners greeting people to check that out. This house has interesting placement of rock and grass and paths with a few very beautiful plants planted in between all those things. So that whole reliance on rock, you can see there's really not anything that's going to escape from a flame perspective from this planting area. We do see interesting ways that paths are made. You can see a stone patio and a path, and then pretty much low growing ground cover for the most part, with individual plants along this path with, some garden statuary. And it's a very attractive garden to visit. There are some water features. You can see there's a lot of rock around here and low growing plants. And then there's a bird in one of the pictures I have as well, hanging out. Here's some different types of paths, identifying where your plants are going to be and where your paths are going to be. I think is one of the most important first steps if you're starting on a new garden, so you can really define those planting areas and define where you're not going to plant anything. If you don't do that to start with, you will in the future regret it and start whacking this vegetation to try and put a path in later. And then human components. Here is a patio. It's got a stone underneath rather than a wood deck. Wood decks are always vulnerable, and switching them out for stone is a good idea. You have some large trees. The house is way over here. So there is a pergola, and there are some lattice work that you would not want around your house or connecting to your house. But in this case, it develops a nice privacy feature for this human landscape, which is a pleasant place to hang out. Seating, I love this one. These shrubs are a little tall, but they are deciduous and quite moist and nowhere near the house as well. Okay, so mulch. Mulch can be a risk factor. These are some photos of an event where, and a kind of experiment to see how quickly and how tall the flame lengths are from different types of mulch. And pine needle mulch really is the most flammable and has the largest flame lengths. So by default, there are lots of areas around many Tahoe homes that use pine needle mulch because the needles fall and people leave it instead of having bare ground. But it's really not a good idea as a characteristic because it's flammable, and then the ability to have it through large areas. So this is an area In the Tubbs fire, where there actually was mulch that ignited, but it was not connecting to the house. And so having it in sort of contained islands is definitely doable and probably will help your plants reduce the amount of water you have to use to keep them irrigated. But it's definitely not something to use continuously throughout your yard. Here's one example of mulch used in a separated island. The plants are well spaced, there's rock features, and it's an attractive feature. But the house is far away, and this mulch is not continuous to the house. So that looks fairly appropriate. Okay, so I spent a lot of time just talking about the design features, which are really important from a defensible space standpoint and from a maintenance and enjoyment standpoint, all those components that I described earlier. But now, what should I plant? I would like to suggest that you could consult our new guide, the Lake Tahoe Master Gardeners, in connection with the Tahoe Resource Conservation District, developed a list of plants that are good performers in the Lake Tahoe Basin, and they are more defensible from a defensible space and fire hazard perspective because they have high moisture content, they're low growing, they have low volatile organic compounds, aren't very dense, and so you can see them on the list there. That's one page of a 2-page brochure. We have copies we can send out to people. And also our goal was, in keeping it short, to have it so you can take it and put it in your pocket and take it to the nursery and look at the options that are on sale there and choose some that are both high performers and grow well in Lake Tahoe through all those challenges described, and can contribute to a defensible landscape if put in the appropriate places. So the last one on that list was sun. You can see there's a number of different types of sun or shade plants, and those need to be chosen to suit your site as well. So I'm going to go through these. But I would like to echo that there really aren't any fire-safe plants. If you look to the left, that is a cactus that burned in the Tubbs fire. So any plants can burn in the right conditions, but some are more resistant. They're harder to ignite. They generate less heat when they're burning, and they produce shorter flame heights than others. So selecting them, putting them in the right place, and then maintaining them. In Tahoe, we mostly have to irrigate some of these types of plants, and so keeping them moist, keeping them pruned is important. Native and drought-tolerant plants can be options, but maintaining the plants over time is the most important factor. Choosing a plant and then ignoring it, even if it is resistant, does not mean that you have a defensible landscape. Okay, that said, some plants are more flammable than others. And I showed you that picture of apartment building in Reno catching on fire because of its ornamental juniper. This is a South Lake Tahoe house, and there's a whole layer of ornamental juniper underneath some lodgepole pine right next to a house with wood shake roof. Ornamental junipers in particular are very flammable because of their volatile organic compounds. They're very popular in the Tahoe Basin, and I think they were planted throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s because they're drought tolerant. They stay green year round. They require little care. When I took ornamental horticulture at the community college here, it was recommended to plant these because they're so tolerant and you don't have to really do much for them, and they provide green. Right. However, they're very flammable. And, to me, this is a nightmare situation, this picture. And you should definitely take those out. So some plants are more flammable than others, but none are completely fire safe. So let's go through the contents of our guide and what was recommended. So high moisture content plants. plants. What does that mean? So basically, non-woody plants or herbaceous, such as grasses, flowers, succulents, are considered herbaceous plants, and they have fairly high moisture content. They do require irrigation in Tahoe during the growing season, but they may be 65 to 80% water by weight, which is compared to woody plants that have a lot more carbon storage, who may only have 35 to 50% water content when actively growing. They're less likely to catch fire, and once ignited, they burn more slowly and less intensely. So they're not fire safe, but they are lower risk than other types of plants. Once they're dry, they can be a fire hazard during the late summer or fall, or if you stop watering, then that dead growth should be removed because they also contribute to the fuel around your house. And for woody plants, generally deciduous have higher moisture content than evergreens. Evergreens are the ones that stay green year round, and deciduous drop their leaves. So here's an example of higher moisture content plants for an herbaceous. Here's a succulent, and then down here is a creeping snowberry, and that's the species name to the right. So these would be more fire resistant than the evergreen versions or the woody versions. Okay, low growth. So what that means is shorter plants. They produce shorter flames and they have less fuel than taller plants. So herbaceous plants and shrubs that are low growing should be on your priority list. Up here we have coreopsis or tickweed, and below Japanese spirea as a shrub, but that's not very woody. These will generally die off on their own and come back next year as a perennial. Both of these, right? But the shrubs will continue on with stems from the previous year. So pruning annually can help make sure that you are minimizing that flammable material. Okay, so low oil resin content. So many evergreens have volatile organic compounds within them that can combust when a fire approaches. So those gases help them burn very intensely. So avoiding them altogether is really your best bet. This is an ornamental juniper. It isn't a planting island, but it's awfully close to the house, and I would not do that. Here's arborvitae, and this is actually under the eaves of this house with some lovely ornamental junipers underneath. So basically, this is also my nightmare scenario. And we should avoid ever planting these types of plants this close to the house. And if you have them, you should remove them. Okay. Low density plants. What we mean by that is plants that are naturally somewhat sparse. They have less dry material because they have less plant material, like lupin and columbine. And that can also reduce potential fuels. So here's a beautiful native Western columbine that grows naturally in the Tahoe Basin, but makes a nice component of a garden. And over here is a Russell lupin. So many of our most beautiful landscape plants in Tahoe are domesticated versions of native plants as well. So a Russell lupin is just a very large, beautiful version of a native lupin. So a lot of those adapted plants and that are similar to our natives are really quite beautiful in a garden setting. Okay, deciduous trees and shrubs. So deciduous, they shed their leaves in the winter, and obviously there's some fuel there that you might want to rake up, but they tend to accumulate less dry matter. They're not pumping out and growing all winter long because they cannot. And they contribute less to the fuel load. Here is a red osier dogwood in the winter. It's quite beautiful and a reason that many people plant it. Here it is in the summer. And then Japanese maple. It's a gorgeous shade tolerant that you often see in an understory. Once again, you don't want a lot of understory under flammable trees, but the placement of this tree looks appropriate to me, so it does not seem to be a fire hazard. Okay, and then understanding your site's capacity is also important, and understanding what can grow well there. So here are the categories of sun availability. When you go to a nursery, you'll see plants marked as full sun or part shade, or shade plants. And these are basically categorized by how much sun is in that particular location. A full sun plant needs 6 hours, part sun 4 to 6, part shade 2 to 4. And shade is generally an area that has 2 or less hours of sunlight during the day. And this is really very common in Tahoe, a lot of shade because of our overstory of native trees. So, sun plants, here are some examples from our plant list guide. Here are hollyhocks, black-eyed Susans. This is under the gondola at Heavenly Village. If you ever have the chance, go check it out in July. This was a picture I took in July. It's a bed of beautiful wildflowers that they seed out every year. It's really quite lovely. And Shasta daisies. These are all sun plants. They grow, 2, possibly 3 feet, although hollyhocks can get quite tall, and add beauty to any garden as long as there's plenty of sun. Here are shade and part shade plants that are on the list. You can see in this garden, this was one of the gardens on our tour this summer. It's in the shade. It has this beautiful hosta, which grows well there. Creeping lamium. There are a lot of varieties of this type of plant and it has many variations that can look quite beautiful. It's a ground cover and can beautify a garden landscape without a lot of work. Here is lungwort and then western sword ferns. So there actually is quite a palette of plants available for very shady areas that you can explore at our local nurseries that add beauty to any backyard. Okay, ground covers. Here are a number of different plants, just like the lamium that I showed you before. Here's another view of a variety of it in one of our gardens. Here is a strawberry plant. This is creeping sedum or stone crop, and also lamb's ears. Lamb's ears grow low but have some beautiful purple flowers late in the summer that pollinators just love. So these are all ways to cover bare ground. There were a lot of pictures of bare ground in some of the diagrams about defensible space, but it doesn't need to be bare ground. These are all low growing. And if a gardener has the time and the energy and the ability to irrigate, then some of those areas which are quite fire safe can also be beautiful with some of these low growing ground covers. Okay, shrubs. Our guide does list some shrubs as being lower risk, and these are all deciduous shrubs. So here's thimbleberry, which produces some berries, as named. Scowler's willow is very common, even in drier areas on slopes in the Tahoe Basin, you find it. And it's a beautiful plant, has lovely colors in the fall. Lilacs, I wish I had one. I can't get mine to grow, but these are gorgeous, and I do see them pretty regularly around the Tahoe Basin. And then here is Japanese barberry. And so all of these shrubs are good choices. This one's a bit taller than you would want to have it by your house. So this is actually out, you can see by the lake, and not close to a structure, or underneath a tree of any size. So these are all things to consider, but if you're choosing shrubs, these are lovely options that are on the fire resistant scale. Okay, so I didn't show you all the pictures of every type of plant in the brochure. I just encourage you to download it. I have a QR code later, and just take it to the nursery with you because there are many wonderful options for making that area look beautiful. Moving on, zone 2, reduce fuel. That's the 30 to 100 feet. And in review, it's done to reduce the risk of fire spreading from the forest to the home or from the home to the forest so that your house fire doesn't burn the forest. And it's important to thin out the trees, create islands or groupings of vegetation, remove dead vegetation, dead wood, rake the pine needles in the spring, and have your outbuildings farther than 30 feet from your home so that you have some ability not to have those things catch fire and then affect your home. One option for this area, I mean, these are all important things to start with, but there are ways to also beautify zone 2. And I took this picture from Backyard Plants of the Tahoe Basin booklet that was done with Living with Fire program. And it's really kind of naturescaping. So you can see there's some very low ground covers here. There's kind of couple of dead sticks. This is out away from the home. You have a few trees, you have a few small trees, but you really have an amazingly beautiful landscape here. So native plants. Native plants generally are very well adapted to the climate, as in they're native here. However, as I described before, coniferous plants are generally more flammable and have higher hazards. So I did not recommend this next to the home, but in zone 2, they can be maintained as islands. You don't want plants to be or shrubs continuous cover, but having islands can certainly beautify the landscape. They should be pruned, and you should take out the dead material, keep them low, and such to maintain your defensible space. Some of our native shrubs don't resprout, but some do. You can really cut them down and allow them to grow back. Some may not sprout well, so you might want to take different chunks out of a landscape that's complete shrubs and reduce that continuity as described before. They can also be planted if you have sunny locations and just bare ground. Some of these things can be planted to improve that zone 2 area. Here's one that is woody but deciduous. So all the ribes species that we have throughout the Tahoe Basin are considered less risk than something like a manzanita that is evergreen. And these can be pretty severely trimmed. I cut mine off completely last year, and it was back this year, small and not large, not getting in the way. So these can be an attractive part of zone 2. Here's some native yarrow. This is somewhat near a fence, but you could just really lean into what you already have growing and encourage it, water it, help it spread. Okay, so I've gone through the different types of plants that could be really useful to you in your defensible space and your entire property. But I also wanted to share this landscaping checklist. So it's really easy to get a defensible space inspection from your local fire agency. And those folks will give you great ideas about what to remove, what to prune back, how to improve your structures to reduce your risk. So do that work. Use the free chipping and green waste services that we have available, and which are amazing and aren't available to people all over the state. We have a lot of great services that are provided by our local fire departments. And then design your sustainable garden or yard with a layout, identifying where you're going to put things, and then what you're going to put there. And you won't remember what we talked about today, so consult some of our resources on what plants grow well. I think it's really important to adapt your expectations if you're moving to Tahoe from elsewhere and really learn about the plants that can grow here, which is so different than most of the rest of California. But there are plants that flourish here, and they can be grown and lead to a beautiful landscape. So I recommend the new brochure. This is the front side of the one I was showing you earlier. It's a selection guide, and once again, no plant is fire safe, but these are plants that will do well and have fire resistant capacities as long as you put them in the correct places. Talk to your neighbors. If they've been gardening, I get a lot of great tips from neighbors. Talk to people at the nurseries. They know a lot about the different types of plants. And then try talking to a master gardener. They're a great resource. Here are some of the amazing brochures that have been developed in collaboration with the Living with Fire in Lake Tahoe program. You can see there's great resources available for you. Here is the QR code for the new Master Gardener plant selection list. There's a lot of great information. And you could contact a Master Gardener. So what is a Master Gardener? A Master Gardener is a community member that's gone through a training program with the University of California Cooperative Extension. It's 50 hours of formal classroom training, and the goal is for Master Gardeners who volunteer to provide practical research-based information to gardeners throughout the state. We have Master Gardener programs associated with land-grant universities throughout the entire country. Here in Lake Tahoe, we are a little bit unique because of our unique ecosystem and our unique climate in California. So we're very fortunate to have people who want to volunteer to help their neighbors learn the specifics of Lake Tahoe gardening. They offer free public classes and workshops on a variety of topics. They answer questions by an email helpline, and they go to events. This was a fire festival, and they laid out zone 0 to 5 to 30 to 100 and identified plants for people to think about in each zone. And then they publish articles in newsletters. You can sign up for the newsletter that you get monthly that gives you gardening tips for Lake Tahoe. This is a map, I'm sorry, a picture of the UC Master Gardener website, which sure came in handy when I was developing my presentation. So thanks for all the great information put together there to all the UC Master Gardeners here in Lake Tahoe. Here's how to contact your Master Gardeners. If you don't remember the website, you can just go to, just Google Master Gardeners of Lake Tahoe and you will find them. Here's me, although I appear to have forgotten the R in my own name. Feel free to contact me. I maintain our forest research and outreach website, so lots of great forestry information as well.